Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun channel. I wanted to make a very brief video that shows how we live in some unprecedented times. And not only is it unprecedented, it's biblical. And last week on Canary Cry News Talk, we reported on the story about how scientists are making or have made a mouse embryo that has 4% human genes. And it's pretty clear that the direction they are going with combining human genetics into animals is certainly taking place at a rapid rate. And of course, all the theories about how that will play out have been made in science fiction movies and stuff, but you don't have to go outside your Bible. All you got to do is go to Genesis 6 and look at what happened in terms of the Nephilim and the sons of God mating with the daughters of men. And even if you don't buy the part about the Nephilim being giants and these hybrids of angelic and human mixture, you can basically go to the beginning of Genesis and God creating everything and showing how each were after its own kind, and logically deduce that maybe we're not supposed to mix species because God made each after their own kind, and to start to mess with it is to basically be playing God. And of course, the headlines concerning the virus has a lot to do with this genetic modification and the vaccine, as we are going to call it now on this channel, based on the censorship that is taking place. And speaking of censorship, I wanted to segue into the story I wanted to relay to everybody, because I know we talk about Twitch a lot, and this is a story that I'm going to bring up in the next Canary Cry News Talk, which will be streamed on Twitch as well as here on YouTube. I know some of you guys don't like it, but we're going to keep doing it anyway and trying to bring you the news from a biblical worldview as much as possible, because while YouTube is locking down on things until they literally shut us down, I'm just going to keep posting on YouTube as much as I can, but also on BitChute, and I've been meaning to put it on library.tv and stuff like that. But the story here was published by Paul Joseph Watson, which I know some of you guys know from InfoWars and stuff like that. It's really not important who published it, because I want to bring your attention to the actual story. The headline here: I have power, trans Twitch moderator who identifies as a deer threatens to censor critics. And it says here, a transgender Twitch Safety Advisory Council member who identifies as a deer, yes, really, bragged on a live stream about having the power to censor critics, asserting, "Some people should be afraid of me." And if we scroll down here, I'll play a little clip for you of this person talking about their deer identity.
So in my spare time, I go out to my yard. In my spare time, I go out to my yard and I prance around and I eat grass. And I just munch it because it helps me feel like in tune with my deer self. So I do my best.
And you can see the chat scrolling through there talking about if this person is mentally disturbed. And unless this is a crazy troll job, yes, I think there is something mentally going on here. But I'm not here to make fun of this person. I'm here to show how biblically this is something that's addressed in the scriptures. And it's really fascinating when you look at it that way, because as I began this video of how they're putting human genetics into animals, the psychology, the mentality of going the other direction of humans wanting to become animals is more and more of a thing. And it's there psychologically. It's only a matter of time before folks like this can actually inject themselves with deer DNA or whatever it is to become actually deer-like, which sounds crazy. But again, there's a Genesis 6 reference to this whole thing. But I want to bring your attention to some scriptures here. The first one from 2 Peter 2. Now, this is the one that actually addresses the sin of the angels. In verse 4, if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them deep into hell, or Tartarus, placing them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness among the eight, if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction, reducing them to ashes as an example of what is coming on the ungodly. So again, this is referencing the angels that sinned. Really, the only angelic beings that are recorded to sin in the Bible are the B'nai Ha-Elohim that came down and mated with human women back in Genesis 6. And of course, Sodom and Gomorrah being about what it is and the destruction therein. But it gets even more clear here. Towards verse 9 and on, if all this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to hold the unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment. Such punishment is specifically reserved for those who indulge the corrupt desires of the flesh and despise authority. Bold and self-willed, they are unafraid to slander glorious beings. And this is, of course, sometimes translated angels. Yet not even angels, though greater in strength and power, dare to bring such slanderous charges against them before the Lord. So even some of the angels won't dare to do this. Verse 12, these men are like irrational animals, creatures of instinct, born to be captured and destroyed. They blaspheme in matters they do not understand, and like such creatures, they too will be destroyed. The harm they will suffer is the wages of their wickedness. And so it's really interesting that this very blatant blasphemy against God and his created order is described as acting like irrational animals. And this whole sentiment is echoed in Jude, which only has one chapter. If you go down to verse 10, these men, however, slander what they do not understand, and like irrational animals, they will be destroyed by the things they do instinctively. So it's interesting how the Bible has this connection point about men acting like animals as being this abhorrent thing, this result of rejecting God. And what's fascinating, of course, is if you look at the theory of evolution and everything else, we are just molecules in motion, we're just animals. The concept is there philosophically, but we're entering this era where people who want to can start to mess with themselves genetically. And that's the whole transhumanist agenda. And the last biblical reference that I want to bring to your attention is from Daniel 4. This is the famous chapter where Nebuchadnezzar basically becomes like a beast. Verse 31, while the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. It is decreed to you, King Nebuchadnezzar, that the kingdom has departed from you. You will be driven away from mankind to live with the beasts of the field, and you will feed on grass like an ox. And 7 times will pass by you until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdom of mankind and gives it to whom he wishes. Verse 33, at that moment, the sentence against Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from mankind. He ate grass like an ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird.
In my spare time, I go out to my yard and I prance around and I eat grass. And I just munch it because it helps me feel like in tune with my dear self.
But again, my point of this video is not to just bash on this person who claims to be trans and identifies with a deer and all this kind of ridiculous kind of stuff. My point is that we ought to be praying for people like this. Pray for your enemies, right? But even in the book of Daniel, chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar restored. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven and my sanity was restored to me. Then I praised the Most High and I honored and glorified him who lives forever. And so even Nebuchadnezzar was restored from this beast-like state. So as weird and strange as this is, there's still hope for this person here that they may turn and see Christ and be freed. But there is one element of this that I think is something that we ought to mention before I wrap up the video. And that's concerning those who take the mark of the beast and the theory that is so relevant now about how the mark may change your human DNA into some other beast DNA. That might potentially be the end of your salvific potential. And I say that because of verses like this in Revelation chapter 14, verse 9 through 11. And a third angel followed them, calling out in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on his forehead or on his hand, he too will drink the wine of God's anger poured undiluted into the cup of his wrath. And he will be tormented in fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. Day and night there is no rest for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. So there's something about taking the mark of the beast that makes you irredeemable. And that's why there's those of us in our current generation thinking that maybe this changes your genetics and you no longer have the human lineage that Jesus came to restore. And instead, you have diluted yourself. You have moved away from your humanity and the inherent salvation that comes with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is consistent with what takes place with the Nephilim and the whole concept of the seed of the serpent as opposed to the seed of the woman. And while I don't subscribe to the serpent seed theory in terms of Eve actually mating with Satan, I do think there's a precedence here that's set, and it's very clear in the Bible in multiple places, including Daniel 2. I said there was a last scripture a couple scriptures ago, but I'm just going to throw it in here because I think it's relevant. Verse 43, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. They will mingle themselves with the seed of men. Who is they? That's the long-standing question. Some people say it's just royalty, but if we get anything out of the scriptures here in terms of our current predicament in the year 2020, moving into the future, then I'd say this mingling of genetics and changing ourselves at the DNA level has very much everything to do with God's impending judgment upon the world. So that's all I have for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe, hit the thumbs up button. All the ways you can support the channel are in the description section. I appreciate your ongoing support over the years, and I hope you have an awesome day. God bless.